Why are you for affirmative action?
Yeah, so I'm for affirmative action for three key reasons. The first is that it helps to level the playing ground of higher education, especially for underserved minorities across the US. Number two, it helps to contextualize and underserved minorities' achievements within the advantages and disadvantages of the environment they grew up in. And number three, it acts as a sort of corrective course, although kind of imperfect, but nonetheless a corrective course for ensuring that equality of opportunity is given to as many college applicants as possible.
Yeah, equality of opportunity. Can you talk a little bit more about, to you, what that means and how affirmative action contributes to that?
Yeah, sure. So equality of opportunity simply means that everybody has as equal of a chance as possible without regard to their income or their race or their background to achieve something meaningful or to be successful within their lives. How does affirmative action help out with that? Well, if you were to consider a world of say college applications where or college admissions where affirmative action wasn't a policy or affirmative action isn't applied to college applicants, um, colleges would largely have to judge applicants based on sort of their list of achievements um, that that they would carry to that college. And so applicants that have a greater list of achievements, applicants that have say parents that have the money to help fund their extracurriculars or take them to say sports practices, just applicants that have that strong both financial and family environment are going to be able to succeed better, or going to be able to have that more impressive list of things to showcase than somebody who doesn't have those things, right? But what affirmative action does again is contextualize and say, hey, look, if somebody's able to outperform given their limited resources, then if assuming that that person also has the qualities and traits that the college wants, the applicant that would benefit from affirmative action should be selected versus the candidate that typically normally wouldn't get any benefit or disadvantage from affirmative action, because affirmative action really doesn't disadvantage anybody, but it does benefit a lot of people.
One of the main vocal oppositions to affirmative action is that it is sort of a racial bias. It has reverse racism. What would your response be to that?
So I think when a lot of people criticize affirmative action for promoting reverse racism, they're talking about it in the context of say white applicants and Asian applicants that are oftentimes actually overrepresented at major institutions of higher learning, right? Even and this goes outside of say top 30 schools, top 20 schools, Ivy Leagues. This actually goes to a lot of universities across the US. So, for example, I believe that there is a statistic. I could actually pull it up. I have a Google Doc with me right now, and it basically shows how, say, for example, at the University of Mississippi, which is a state flagship school of the state of Mississippi, that 12% of all students at the school are black, but 50% of all I believe that it's students in poverty in Mississippi are black. And so there's a vast underrepresentation of black people in the university system. And I can actually pull this up right now. I'm not gonna share anything, but there's actually lots of sources which show that Asian American representation, even at colleges like say Dartmouth and other Ivy League schools, is over is vastly overrepresented compared to the percentage of Asian Americans within the general population. So the in the US, Asian Americans make up, I believe, 5.5% of the population. But at many Ivy League schools, they make up at minimum at least 10% of the student body, and in some cases, maybe over 20% the student body. So that's an overrepresentation of 4 times. Um, and so when people say that it disadvantages applicants aren't that don't tend to be poor, or that don't tend to have more of the, again, like what I mentioned earlier, uh disadvantaged backgrounds, even though those applicants may not have like those disadvantaged backgrounds, which would make them great candidates for affirmative action, they're not being disadvantaged by the university system. They're still getting admitted, they're still finding their own success, and all it is just making sure that URMs, or underrepresented minorities, get that success as well.
Another big opposition to affirmative action is that because people in poverty are less likely to have the education that is usually required to go to these colleges, it can negatively affect the grades of those colleges, um, which leads to less applicants down the line. What would your response be to that and the people who say that?
So I mean, look, there might be some applicants that are underprepared, but I mean, there's also many applicants that do get into these schools that you could argue aren't that qualified either. Like a lot of the admitted applicants, again, if you're talking about applicants that may have had like better resources growing up, they might not have more of that natural innate drive or aptitude um, to like do well in these schools either. I mean, regardless of like how you grew up in general, like once you arrive to these kinds of schools, what really matters is more your drive to get through them than necessarily your grades, although that might depend uh if, say, for example, you plan on going to like law school or like med school or PA school or whatever it might be. um and then in terms of, again, like people from lower income communities uh not being able to handle the rigorous curriculums of like very prestigious schools, that points to more of a problem that a lot of people who are anti-affirmative action may not want to address, which is systemic economic discrimination against underrepresented minority groups, which tend to be blacks, tend to be Native Americans, tend to be Latinos, right? So, in a lot of cases, what would solve these problems? Like creating a better system for funding public schools in, say, inner cities. It would also be uh, reversing the economic damage done by policy, say like redlining, or like denying mortgages to Black and Latino home buyers, which often act as a like home buying. Owning a home typically acts as like one of the best ways to build intergenerational wealth, which then allows people to have the savings and money to spend on more intangible services like tutoring, like um, mentoring for their children in schools, which then allows them to have better grades, and it kind of like a roller coaster effect. Um, and so to those people, I would say, well, we should have affirmative action, but what we should also do, in addition to affirmative action, is provide economic support to these groups that have been denied that support for basically a very, very long time.
Where in terms of systemic racism in America and other places in the world, how do you think that we can help solve the systemic racism issues above the educational level, above where affirmative action might be tangible?
Um, so do you want me to suggest like policies?
Yes.
Okay. So as for other policies besides affirmative action that can help out, and by the way, let me make this really clear. I do think that they should be done in like alongside affirmative action. I don't think that affirmative action should be excluded as a solution. But again, as for other policies, like say for example, a lot of politicians have recently suggested cash payments to individual citizens. Now, cash payments right now is more in the context of like providing relief now than necessarily long-term relief. But then there's also been politicians like Andrew Yang that have suggested giving aid, or that giving implementing a universal basic income of around 2,000 a month, which I think might be a little excessive, but generally speaking, something that people can use for whatever purpose they want to use it for. If they want to use it for paying their bills, they can use it for paying their bills. If they want to use it for uh, like maybe taking up a part-time job and then using the rest of their time to spend on a hobby of theirs, they can do that. Basically things that will allow people the financial freedom necessary to build uh do things that are more meaningful in their lives. um but as again, as for things that could directly address like educational issues, um again, reforming how schools are funded. So instead of having school districts pay receive their funding from, say, property taxes, maybe we could find like a more uh equitable system for distributing funding across schools, and also allowing for students to perhaps, ooh, what was I going to think about? Also allowing students to have access to a national, perhaps, tutoring program, or like a national, like more of a national like educational service where they can take advantage of free tutors, for example, or like free instruction by volunteers could help out. So if, say, for example, you don't have the resources to pay for like this really highly rated tutor, well, hey, like you could go through this national service or like public or state service that will allow you to get the same quality of tutoring but for free, right? And so I think things like that would really help out. And I think also in general, just eliminating a lot of standardized tests, not all, but a lot. I know that recently the College Board has decided to not um, administer the SAT 2 exams, which I do think is a step in the right direction. Um, and as for the tests that do remain, like, we can make them more applicable to real world knowledge. So generally, tutoring is really good for helping students to improve their rote memorization. But at the end of the day, what really matters in the real world is your ability to solve problems critically. And so if you can design tests and exams around questions that test your ability to like do things in the real world, whatever that might be. And it's a really vague idea in my mind, but if you can design it around that instead of like things that like people with money will be able to do, then I think you will get to a much better system of education.
We're approaching the end of our time here. Do you have anything
Mhm.
else to say regarding affirmative action that you might say to convince someone who is against affirmative action of the policy or of the benefits of the policy?
Look, I mean, affirmative action at the end of the day is not going to take away your spot at a higher like institution of learning. Like, if you're against affirmative action because you think that Jamal is taking away that spot that you deserve so much, that you just work so hard for, uh yeah, I got news for you. Look, I myself did pretty well in school. Like, I've in my own college admissions process, um like I've applied to many Ivy League schools. I applied to many like top 20, top 30 schools. I got into places like Georgia Tech and UNC Chapel Hill. I did very well on the SAT, got a 99th percentile score, which is above a 1500. So you would think that I would be somebody who would be against affirmative action, but at the end of the day, I realized that although a lot of my success was attributed to my hard work, a lot of it was also attributed to the fact that I grew up in a place where I had more resources. I grew up in a place that wasn't that violent, and at the end of the day, you just have to have more empathy for others and consider that, hey, maybe the world isn't maybe the world isn't not everyone's world is like mine. And so that's what I would say to those who might otherwise consider being against affirmative action.